my name's Zoe Adjonyoh. I am a chef, an author, a food activist, if you like, from southeast London. And I have spent the better part of the last 10 years evangelizing and celebrating West African food and ingredients. The vehicles which I've used to do that, conveniently for me, have been a restaurant called Zoe's Ghana Kitchen, a street food and catering business called Zoe's Ghana Kitchen, and guess what? A cookbook also called Zoe's Ghana Kitchen. And it's been a very personal exploration of my identity through food, which I've shared publicly. So why is food and identity such a big deal for me, you might wonder? Well, I'm going to have to take water quite a lot. I am the daughter of two immigrants to this country. My mother is Irish. Look at them there, gorgeous folks. My dad, Charles, from Ghana. And my mum's Irish, as I said. So that makes for an interesting upbringing. You might wonder how they came to meet from Bantry Bay and Accra. In the 70s, the context was no Irish, no blacks, no dogs. And they all, immigrants from those communities were all pushed together in a certain part of northwest London. So my folks met at a disco in Kilburn. I did not inherit any moves. But through my work, actually, I've come to meet a lot of people from my generation who similarly have mixed parentage from West Africa and Ireland. And I didn't realize until I was in my 30s that I wasn't the only Irish Ghanaian in the world. That's the power of food, step one. But no, so I realized from a very early age, actually, how important food was in terms of identity, because my Irish grandmother used to send my mum care packages. So these would include things like Galty cheese, soda bread, red lemonade, Tato crisps, typical Irish staples that my mum really looked forward, really looked forward to receiving. I don't know how they survived the journey, but they did. Probably because there's a lot of additives in there, but let's not talk about that. I could tell from an early age that was made her feel safe and familiar and connected to Ireland. And we actually spent quite a lot of time in Ireland as a family, mostly because it was cheap to get to and close to get to. So I spent a great deal of time there, a lovely time, rolling around in the mountains, fishing. So I really understood what Irishness was as part of my heritage. However, the Ghanaian side of who I was a little bit more of a mystery, largely because my dad wasn't particularly present in my early childhood. We didn't have any Ghanaian family in London. And, it was a working class family. We couldn't afford expensive trips to Ghana. So what did Ghana look like as part of my heritage and identity? I wasn't really sure, to be honest. And my dad was a very laconic man, and still is to this day. But when he was present, he used to bring home these lovely bags of, I'm going to avoid the word exotic, but interesting ingredients that smelled different, that looked different, that tasted different, very, very different. And it intrigued me because I saw that in the preparation and the cooking of these things, he was transporting himself home as well in those moments. So, I stood by his side and watched him. This is kenke up there, fermented maize dough for those of you that don't know. And asked him questions about the food and the ingredients and how he prepared them. And even at 8 years old, my dad wasn't an amazing cook by any stretch of the imagination. Poor dad, sorry, but you weren't. Even at 8 years old, I could tell when something was burning on the stove before he could. So it was always destined, it seems, for me to be cooking. But it became very important. So food became a touch point, especially because he wasn't particularly open to sharing culture from Ghana either. I would hear him on the phone speaking in Fanti or Twi or these incredible fast languages I didn't understand, and I'd want to know more about that. I'd want to know how to speak those languages, but he would laugh. He was like, what do you want to know that for? You live in London. And it kind of made sense, I guess, but I still wanted to know. Anyway, so food became my vehicle to access that. And growing up in Woolwich at the time. Oh, I went too far too soon, sorry. Growing up in Woolwich on a pretty much all-white council estate, there was only one other family of colour there, and they were an Indian family. And this is I hope I'm not making or reinforcing any horrible stereotypes, but they had, the mother of that household, she cooked some amazing food, and the smells that would come out of that kitchen were intoxicating to me. I love them, you know. But the other kids on the council estate didn't understand those smells. It was a bit too other for them. They didn't really get what was interesting or delicious about that. And so it meant that they bullied that family, and they bullied the kids from that family. Quite a lot, actually. So one of the tools I had in my armory to avoid getting some of that bullying in our direction was to invite those kids into our house. So when we were cooking something like peanut butter stew, which is basically my dad's version of groundnut soup, which is a very ubiquitous dish across West Africa. All the countries have a version of it. But to my knowledge, nobody who's ever eaten that has ever had, no, everyone loves it basically. It's a delicious, spicy, gorgeous dish. So I brought these people in, fed them, and then what can they say about it after that? Yeah, give me more. So, you know, it broke down that barrier straight away of the otherness of it, and they couldn't complain or moan or find something picky. But the otherness was interesting to me because otherness equaled fear, and fear equals rejection and all the other things that go with that. So, also just a bit more context. You know, in the 80s, there wasn't very many black faces in the media or on TV, definitely not in the cooking world. And you know, the mainly white Western media's portrayal of Africa was quite negative. You know, it was all about poverty and famine and conflict, and often painting the whole continent with the same brush rather than looking at each country in isolation. And again, I couldn't really work it out what was happening because I was having a lovely time cooking kenke and shito and tilapia at home. I was like, hang on a minute, there's something missing here. So how did I turn peanut butter stew into Zoe's Ghana kitchen? Good question. I'm still figuring it out. But it started at Hackney Wick in 2010, Hackney Wick Arts Festival. I don't know if any of you know East London very well or at all, but Hackney Wick has become quite a trendy enclave of hipsters and the like. I still live there, sorry. 10 years later, and I still cook in the same house, actually. But at this time, it was an industrial wasteland, kind of. There wasn't any bars, restaurants, or cafes. And all these people were flooding in for these art studios, which is part of the festival. I was kicked out of my house because my girlfriend at the time was a fine art video artist, and she'd converted the flat into a gallery. So I had to fill my time with something, and I saw an opportunity to make money. So I made a sign and some flyers saying Zoe's famous peanut butter stew, obviously only famous to me and my friends, but they didn't know that. So the marketing trick kind of worked. And you know, the smell as I've already said, it's a very delightful smell. It's spicy, it's sweet, it's piquant. So before I knew it, I had a crowd outside my front door, and I was selling out of this stew. The most important point was, people had never tasted anything like that before, not even the plantain. And they were asking a lot of questions about where it came from. A lot of people didn't even know where Ghana was. So then I had to think, okay, dry mouth. I had to think, why don't people know about this? You know, why is there such a gap between people's knowledge about West African food when I knew there to be many, 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 many restaurants existing in London selling that stuff? Well, I realized that people were cooking for themselves. They were cooking for the communities in which they came from. And they didn't really care too much about inviting anybody else in because those communities were cooking to remind themselves of home, to get that familiarity. So I had to think, okay, how do I bridge this gap? How do I get people to go home via the plate, but also invite other people in so that they can experience this and bridge the gap in their understanding of what West African food is? And so the concept was born, I guess, supper clubs in my house. And the answer was kind of threefold for me. So this is where my Irishness and my Ghanaianishness collide. We're feeders on both sides of the equation. And so, so one thing was long table dining, right? Pack them in, get everybody bustled in close together, which for a lot of people is uncomfortable, but actually you have to talk to the person next to you if you're elbow to elbow. There's just no choice. So I forced people to be in close proximity. Then there was the concept of sharing plates, like feasting, which obviously isn't very common in most British households or dining experiences either. So having to share the food meant that people had to ask each other to pass something, pass the red, pass the... Again, so it opened up a conversation and a dialogue. And the third one was about the aesthetics. So going back to like the whole negative stereotype around the continent, I wanted to show a modern, contemporary version of West Africa. So it was about modern prints and fabrics. I created a Spotify playlist called Zoe's Garden Kitchen, which, yes, you can all subscribe to. It's available online whenever you want. High life and Afrobeat. And people really engaged with this. It was a cozy, inviting space. So for some people it was familiar food, for others it wasn't, but everybody was in this space together having a shared experience. And I loved it. And I kept loving it, and then da-da-da-da-da. So some other examples then of how does food build bridges between us? Well, if I go back to, I don't know how many of you are in your 40s or above, but definitely I remember getting pulled away from the TV, from Neighbours, Home and Away, EastEnders, get in for your dinner at the dinner table. And it was a time where, this is where we connected. Have you done your homework? How was school? You caught up with each other. I don't think that exists in the same way as it used to back then, but it was certainly this point. So from an early point in my life, I realized that food was about bringing people together to have that conversation, to connect. And then also, of course, you've got like the meal that says, I'm sorry, or I love you, or I'm sorry that I ruined your jumper last week when I borrowed it, Sarah, I'm waiting for my meal. And you've got dining, dinner parties. We all love to host a dinner party, don't we? Because you bring all your friends round for dinner and you can show off your kitchen skills. That is essentially a supper club, by the way, so if you are any good at cooking, then you should be charging. I suggest start at £30 a head, go up depending on your skill level. Anyway, so I took this concept around and grew it out. But what are more specific kind of examples across the globe? Let's look at street food. Now, every continent has street food in its culture. What's amazing about street food is its ability to bring people together from different classes, from society, from different backgrounds, because you will have men in suits and people who ride bicycles or whatever, just different people from various backgrounds, all queuing in one line to get that one dish that they know that this person does really well. And that's across continents. The same thing doesn't happen in restaurants, because restaurants sort of target a specific spend per head or a specific type of clientele. So they're not really interested in melding all those different things together, apart from Zoe's Garden Kitchen, obviously. So street food's one. Then you have jollof. So in April 2017, I had a cookbook come out. I think I've mentioned it. And I got flooded with messages from around the world, from people in the diaspora who were very proud of me, and it was very heartwarming. Someone was celebrating their culture and cuisine. But one message in particular really did stand out for me, and it was from an Irish woman who had a mixed-race family. She was from a small village outside Belfast, and some Nigerian immigrants had moved into that community and joined the local church. And this was, like I say, a very small village. Most of the inhabitants were elderly Irish pensioners. So she was like, oh, how's that going to go down, Nigerian jollof after church versus cabbage and potatoes. Could be awkward. But it wasn't awkward at all, actually. So this lovely thing happened. The Irish community were chowing down on that jollof like you wouldn't believe. They loved it. They wanted the recipe. They wanted to know how it was made. And it just highlighted again to me how important food can be in breaking down those barriers and reaching an understanding between people that we are actually the same. We like the same things. We might eat different things and come from different places, but we have a common ground. Then you have, in conflict zones such as Sierra Leone, Chef Binta I met in Ghana last summer, she grew up during the civil war there, and she talked extensively about how communities, different tribes had to suddenly come together to survive and share food and resources and be inventive. And Chef Binta since went on to train at culinary school, and she goes around the world doing what I do, promoting African food. But the thing is, would she been able to do that if she was a lawyer or a doctor? I'm not sure it would have the same impact. I know from my personal experience, I've been to Russia, Berlin, New York, San Francisco, Napa. I've been able to travel the world to talk about food and share my personal experience of this food and culture, which means that I've been able to give people an experience of food they would never have had before, which has opened their mind or opened an inquiry or a curiosity to that culture. And that's an amazing thing, I think. Chef Binta. Let's look at even, food is a basic human right, or it should be, right? So look at the Calais jungle and how many people came together from across Europe and the UK to share skills, time, and ingredients to make sure that those people were fed when they were in a political vacuum where nobody else was helping them. Or let's look at Instagram. Social media, whether you love it or hate it, it has brought us all together, and food has been the biggest use of that medium. So for the longest time when I started, it was really hard to convince people that African food wasn't just bushmeat. But now you have Kes Cravings, Maria Bradford, Celestia Daninka, Chef Binta. I could go on and on and on. So many people doing wonderful things, breaking down the stereotype visually through food, showing people what this food can be. Then you have this amazing woman, Julia Terschen, who is a cook or chef in America. Julia created Equity at the Table, which is a platform for BAME and LGBTQ women in the food industry. So Julia was overloaded, poor woman, with work. But often the work was about, ethnic food shoots. So she raised the question, hang on, why don't you know any black stylists? Why don't you know any black photographers? Why don't you know any black or BAME, etc.? And they would come back with, well, we just don't know any. So she created a platform. So now we have this online portal of women of color from around the world who have their CVs, and there's no excuse for any publishers or anybody to say we can't find them because we're all there. Hi. So thank you, Julia, for doing that. Okay, so I'm going to circle back because I'm running out of time. And so what is it about? So food is more than just sustenance, I think. Food is a route into understanding your identity and culture. It's a means of cultural exchange. It's a means of, it can be a bridge over many rivers like poverty, conflict, things like this. Let's look at the British love affair with curry as one strong example here. Had it not been for Madha Jaffrey making that accessible for everybody and breaking down the otherness of Indian cuisine, would Britain be as in love as it is with the curry? And it makes it much harder to be racist and bigoted towards an Indian community if you're going down the curry house every Friday night after the pub. It really does. It's that simple. And I could go on and on and on. Like even the fact that the world is so much smaller because of how cheap it is to travel and how often we travel. People go to Thailand and Vietnam, they come back, they're adventurous in their food because of that, and they bring back these concepts, and some of them start businesses. I'm going to put cultural appropriation to one side because I don't have time at all to talk about that today, but it's another talk. But there's still value in being able to share that and get people's minds unlocked to what that cuisine is about and therefore what that culture is about. It's about opening up the mind to curiosity. And I'm just concerned that in today's political climate, we're losing a sense of what's important here because it is a powerful thing, food, and it is a great leveler, and it does open people's minds to other cultures and makes it accessible. And, if it weren't for our integration and the ease of movement around the world, then all of our plates would be very bland without that. And that's it. Thank you.